Awesome. Jonathan, great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us. I know that you're a busy person and you're sort of joining us from your home while watching your son. So I appreciate your time today. My first immediate sort of reaction was the art that I see behind you. Is that an interest of you that you sort of cultivated over the last few years, or has it been a hobby that you've followed?
It is all. Well, I should start by saying thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is the pictures and the guitar behind me. I'm an avid fan of the Grateful Dead. And so these are, this is a picture of Jerry Garcia backstage tuning up from 1977. This one here is from, I think the last or second to last New Year's Eve show, the last New Year's show that Bill Graham did. That is Bill Graham dressed in his finest New Year's regalia. This is from the farewell tour, the 50th anniversary. And then these two are from some great concerts in Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
And this is a guitar autographed by Bob Weir, one of the members of the Grateful Dead. So
wow,
that is how I end up with stuff on the walls.
Before we begin, just one quick note. I had one of my colleagues go to the Sphere in Seattle, I think for the Grateful Dead concert, and he said it was probably one of the best concerts he has gone to. So
the Sphere is amazing. I have been, and it is really a spectacular venue. I highly recommend everybody to go.
Yes. And on that note, Jonathan, again, a separate note, I'm reading the biography of Steve Jobs, and one of the things that he speaks sort of highly about is the marriage between art and technology, right? And I'm sure, especially in marketing, this plays like a huge role, right? Just like having interest in art and sort of cultivating this mode of creativity. So kudos to you for sort of being an avid follower of this brand. But that said, I would love to kickstart the discussion, if that's all right with you.
Sure, sounds great.
Let's do it, Jonathan. So one interesting thing about your background was you started your career in White House, right? Can you tell a little bit about that and sort of what your learnings were, since it seems like a very interesting sort of shift from that to like a corporate career?
Yeah, I started in the White House. Before that, I was on the re-election campaign for President Clinton. And there, I think I learned a lot about, how big enterprises operate. And also, especially in the campaign, how you move very quickly from one thing to another and really pivot and shift. But I really think I think there's three other things that I really learned through my time. One is, if you try and be everything to everyone, you end up really being nothing to anyone.
Right.
And the story I would tell there is, when I got this job offer at IBM, I called one of my closest friends who's at a large tech company that everybody would know. And he was chief of staff to the CEO there. And he said, I have one question for you. What does IBM do? This is somebody who is a massive company. And the fact that we were trying to do everything for everybody, I think really made people say, what does that mean? So that was one I think I learned. Two is about adaptability. And I talked about from the campaign, how do you adjust and change? And I think that's really an important key. You've got to be adaptable. You've got to sort of say, this is worthwhile. This is not, oh, wait, I've been working on this for a long time, but no longer is it relevant or it's losing its importance. You've got to be comfortable just putting it to the side. And it's, there's a guy named James Carville who was big in the Clinton world, in advising President Clinton. And I remember watching him when I was on the campaign, and he said, you've got to be able to stand in the middle of the tornado and let everything spin around you and reach in and grab something and deal with it and then put it back and let it spin out. To me, that is the definition of being adaptable.
Right.
And I think the third thing for me is it's a version of a Belgian phrase of trust arrives on a foot and leaves on a jet plane. You've got to build that trust. You got to put the trust in the bank but you can never take it for granted because it will disappear in a split second. And I think that is really, really, those are three great lessons I learned from my time in the White House and the Treasury.
That's awesome. So the one question I had, based on what you said, especially the first point, right? With large companies like IBM, Salesforce, ServiceNow, right? Just really crystallizing the message is a very, very hard thing to nail. How are you approaching it? Right? Since you guys have multiple business units, multiple product lines, going across geographies, right? Like if somebody asks you, what does IBM do, right? How would you sort of explain that to someone?
Where we are aiming to be the leading hybrid cloud and AI company in the world.
Great. Oh, wow. Okay. You got that nailed down. That's awesome, actually. Pretty impressive.
But it takes a while, right?
Mm.
You've got to keep repeating it over and over and over. And when you're getting sick and tired of saying it,
That's
people might start listening to you.
That's a very interesting point. Jonathan, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I think you mentioned this very nicely or probably politely, that a lot of marketing leaders don't know what a communications leader does, right? A good communication leader does, right? In your experience, what does a good communication leader does? Because a lot of marketing folks don't know about that department, so I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on that piece.
Yeah, I think there are so many synergies between marketing and communications. I'm thrilled that the teams are working together inside of IBM because I think it makes us a better company.
Right.
But I think it's been a learning experience both ways for communicators to learn more about the numbers and the data and everything that goes into the marketing efforts. For marketing, it's really, I think a lot of it has to do with changing how they approach things. Because you might take a marketing activity and really push it towards a specific point, a specific outcome in revenue and pipeline. And communicators are usually looking at things and going, if I do A, B and C will happen. And what does that mean? Or how do we get to A? What other people do we need to start to influence in a different way? And understanding how that comes together. And I think that that's been a good thing about good communicators. And I think the other piece there is a good communicator, and this is similar to marketers, a good marketer will realize that it's not just a one-way street.
Right.
It's got to be a two-way dialogue. It's got to be a two-way interaction to really move the needle in a meaningful way. But the synergies are so important and so close, and the ability for companies and organizations to make the two teams more effective is great.
When you step into the role, Jonathan, of obviously leading both marketing and comms for IBM, right? Like, what was your vision? Like, I'm just curious to sort of hear your thoughts on what vision you laid down in sort of bringing these teams together, but also to do great marketing, right? Any thoughts on your end, and sort of any learnings as well as you step into the new role to sort of lead both of these functions?
I didn't have a ton of a vision at the beginning because it was a quick transition for me. But I also wasn't a marketer with 20 years of experience. The first thing I wanted to do was learn. And to that extent, I spent time with at that point, I had 4 direct reports, and I spent time with each one of them learning about their business.
Wow.
And I spent time then once I got introduced to everybody as the marketing leader, I spent time learning more about the business at a deeper level, spending time with the agency, spending time with the team, spending time with clients, and really understanding what's going on out there and understanding the various pieces, and understanding the data. I heard from somebody, they said to me, and this is so true, that marketing without data is like driving with your eyes closed. Right? How do you really get the data and become a great data-driven, outcome-focused organization? That has become my effort, my focus, my area of really rigor, really trying to drive rigor to get to that point, making myself better at that, but also bringing the team along. Because for me, I'm always learning from people, because I like to say I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I don't like to be the smartest person in the room. And for me, that's not a difficult thing to do.
Very fundamental question on that point, Jonathan. So I'm sure a lot of leaders step into a situation where they are not the expert, right? Because they have been tasked or asked to do something that they have not done before, and they are surrounded by folks who might know more than them in a particular area of some sorts. And immediately imposter syndrome kicks in, right? Like, what value add do I add? Like, how do I make sure that I sort of get respected by my team? What's your guidance on how to actually sort of become a leader when you're not an expert in different places, and sort of make sure that you add value, right?
Yeah. So there are a few things. One is, I think you have to take the time to learn.
Right.
If you walk in the door, whether it's in marketing or it's something else, if you walk in the door and right away you say, "That's it, I'm getting rid of half the organization and we're going to do this and that,"
right,
you're bound to fail, right? If you take time to learn and then you make decisions, I think that's really, fundamentally, that is really key.
Number one, right?
I think you need to be comfortable asking questions. When I worked at the Treasury Department, I worked with a lot of people who were a lot smarter than me, who were PhD economists, and we'd talk about these big complex topics. And at the end of the meeting, I'd say, "So, if I wanted to explain this to my grandmother, how would I do that? What do you think is the best way?" People understood that was me just sort of covering up for the fact that I didn't understand what this complex economic theory was. But it got me comfortable asking, "Give me more detail. Tell me more. Help me understand it." I think it's transparency. I think it is vulnerability. I think that's really important. It's not a weakness.
Right.
It's really the willingness to show up and be seen and really be there, even when you're not the expert, is really important. And I think it builds a culture of trust.
Right.
Builds deeper connections with the people on your team. And then lastly, I would say people have to empower their teams. There are too many people who don't empower their teams. And I have to be honest, with empowerment comes accountability.
Right.
I'm not saying don't do it without accountability, but people have to empower their teams to go do work and do great work.
Jonathan, when I asked this question about what vision did you set for the team, I didn't expect you to say, "I didn't know," when I stepped in and I took my time to learn. I think that, at least for me, feels like the right vulnerable thing to do at that point of time. Because to your first point, if you had gone into the team and say, "Look, let's cut the budget, do ABC," then it's easier to sort of lose trust in what your leadership comes into picture. So I took a bunch of notes, but completely makes sense. I couldn't disagree more on this one.
Yeah, it's culture change. Culture change is or keeping culture up is really the most important thing that you can do in your role.
That's
my
awesome.
opinion.
That's awesome. Jonathan, one other thing that you all have been playing a very active role in is just shaping how AI is adopted in enterprises, but also educating marketers on sort of how to think about AI, right? And you all did a fantastic campaign, I remember, with Adobe and different folks in the ecosystem. What are actually some of the early use cases you are seeing in AI with marketing? Any learnings from sort of trying out some stuff that worked, didn't work? Just like high-level thoughts would be helpful for our teams who are trying to get into the weeds a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, a big piece that everybody looks at, excuse me, and thinks about is content creation.
Right.
And it's an important one, because if you think about, let's think about a company that has 100 products and wants to create 5 assets for each product. And and then wants to put that into 20 different markets and 20 different languages, right there, you've hit 20,000 assets. Just in that quick blink of an eye. That's before you even start updating those assets and making things current. So as we've worked on this, we've done things like working with Adobe and using Firefly. We created 200 assets using Firefly and had over 1,000 variations in our Let's Create campaign in just minutes, maybe an hour, right? And as I looked at that, and I remember going through this, we were doing something for the Masters, and we used this asset that we had created with Firefly. Turned out to be our best performing digital asset of the year. And it had 26 times the engagement rate that our normal assets do.
Wow.
So you do something like that. That's really important. We've developed something in-house called Creative Assistant. We do millions of emails or blogs and brand guidance questions and all that kind of stuff. So this Creative Assistant is really using watsonx can scale our ability to create and distribute assets and really make those assets more relevant and more personal for people, which I think really matters as well. But I think if you look at that, content creation in my mind is really just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much more. We gather millions of client data points of each year, right? I think most companies would.
Right.
And the ability to take that data, have it properly structured, working with our CIO team and our internal experts to have that process properly structured, and then get insights from that data is massive.
Right.
We're doing half the number of events today
than we
did 2 years ago with increased returns. So we got 5% more CIs out of half the number of events this year than we did 2 years ago. That's driven by AI and the focus on using AI to get much more targeted and create better assets. And then if we do that one step further, we can take our cost of a client interest or a CI down by roughly 35-40%. So if we do that, then we can get much more focused and we can actually do more events, or we could increase our presence at a place, or we can, take on a new topic if we needed to, or lean in on other topics. So there's a lot to be done there, and that's all driven by AI, and it's really making a big difference.
Jonathan, I want to really double down on this point, because what you said is a very, very important point, and I want to make sure that the audience will understand it. You said you all are doing half the number of events, but that has resulted in significantly more ROI, right?
5% more CIs.
And can you just explain how did you guys do that? Is it through understanding of the data from a pipeline standpoint from all these events and figuring out, hey, you know what, these 50% events are the main ones and let's put more dollars into it? Is that how it sort of came to that piece? Or?
That's the starting point. But then once you do that, it's understanding who are the right people that you want to try and get to those events. Where are your best opportunities? Where should you not focus? So it's about prioritization, but at the same time as you prioritize, and everybody's talking about prioritize right now, what are you deprioritizing? What are you changing? What are you stopping or reducing significantly to enable you to prioritize and do more? So for us, it is figuring out which are the best performing events. It's figuring out who are the right people that, from a client perspective or partner perspective, that we're trying to have there. And then it's becoming who are the right people we need to send from our perspective so that we're delivering the right content, the right message, the right engagement, the right journeys along the way. That's how we're getting there.
This is a very, very interesting point. I've spoken to a lot of CMOs, and the number one use case that comes up is content creation. Obviously, it's an obvious use case, right? but converting unstructured data into insights for just marketing, but also the event ROI and really sharpening that pencil has not been a use case that I've heard. So I don't know, kudos to your team for actually delivering on that piece. One,
Thank you.
one.
The other one that's exciting, sorry, Kishore, is in about 2 months' time, in October of this year, for those people who aren't watching this immediately, October of 2024, I'll have a first cut at a tool that will allow me to do natural language prompts that understands what we're doing, from budget, from ROI, all those sorts of things.
That's awesome.
And give me recommendations on next best use case or next best action.
Oh, for the prospect who's in the buying journey. Very interesting. Okay. Jonathan, I would buy this tool tomorrow if you guys can outsource it, to be honest with you. Right? That's like the holy grail of where things can go. But
we're excited.
Okay, that's awesome. One question on content creation, actually, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot, and I sometimes worry, like what will happen in the future, right? Because if there is so much content that everybody is producing, right, and it's not that the AI is not getting better; it's getting better in a very fast pace. The cloud models are getting better in terms of understanding the brand voice, brand tone, etc. And if everybody starts producing more and more content, like what will happen to the ecosystem? Do you think the channel effectiveness will go down? Like any sort of thoughts on like where you think this is headed to would just be a good thing to brainstorm with you.
I think a lot of people have been talking about personalization for a long time. But I think you need to go one step further as the content continues to grow. And that's to the space of relevancy. You've got to have relevant content, not just personalized. And I think if you look at the two, that is what's going to help people break through in what's going on, because more and more, there are more and more channels out there, more and more opportunities. But I think that AI is going to help people deliver content into multiple channels. If I look at something like Firefly or Express from Adobe, and I understand that today 80% of average creative's time at IBM is spent on derivative assets, and I could use those tools to make that resizing or those other actions you need to take with derivatives into something that goes much faster. I mean, even I can figure out how to resize something using Express or Firefly. And I think the ability to do that will allow people to create more relevant journeys that and content that will break through for people.
On that point, then, look, I think correct me here if I'm wrong. It's at least very clear to me that the jobs to be done and the functions of marketing team will evolve over the next 5 years, depending on how these kinds of tools will come into picture. And I also heard that you mentioned it in a different podcast as well. How do you think it'll change, Jonathan? Like, do you think is it more of like a skill set question? Is it like operational efficiency question? But how do you imagine the org structure / functional expertise of marketing teams change with all this stuff happening?
I think it's a little bit of all of it. I think one of the key things that's going to happen is I think AI is really going to unlock creativity or awaken creativity in the next 5 years. And the ability, I talked about it before, that 80% of time that the average creative is doing on derivative assets and freeing them up so they can create more new original assets. That's huge. The ability for people like me who are not creative to learn how to get the right prompts to use tools like AI to help provide and create better assets and better relevant journeys for our clients and look at the data and shift directions in a more real-time nature. I think that's going to be hugely important. And I think the ability for AI to really free up time and resources and capacity for more idea-driven work, whether at all levels, whether that's events or content or influencer engagement or management. I think there's great capacity there and great opportunity. It's exciting. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. One thing on that example, Jonathan, that I'm seeing is some bit of skill set democratization, right? Like, for example, I have never been in video editor before, but I can go in and use some tools to create some video clips and blog posts and stuff like that. Just like
Yep.
fascinates me that I can do it myself, never having to learn complex tools in general.
Yeah.
Like, right.
Yeah. I'm amazed every time I try some new tools and exploring and going, wow, I didn't think I could ever do that.
That's great. Awesome. Now, the last couple of questions from me. One question I always wondered is that, like, you know, IBM is a fairly large company. It's one of like the the top few companies from a size standpoint, from market cap standpoint. Like, how do you decide to spend your time on? Like, I'm sure it's a question that you sort of think about because everybody will want to have your own time just to like pick your thoughts, like stuff. Like, what framework do you apply to figure out how do I prioritize my schedule and like get the most out of it?
For me, it's really making sure I understand what the initiatives of the business are, or not the initiatives, the objectives of the business are. So that enables me to then spend time on initiatives that will drive towards those objectives and that will drive client interest and that will engage the teams and that will empower the teams and get them excited about doing great work. If I really make sure I am lockstep with the business and where we're going, I think that is the guide for me. Not I think that is the guide for me into how I should be spending my time.
That's awesome. It's a very clear framework, right? It's as simple as that. By the way, one thing that I'm observing in this podcast, Jonathan, I don't know if I told you this. You have very simple answers to complex questions, which I've sort of enjoyed listening to your answers. Maybe that's how you operate, but that's simplicity. I like it.
I think that if you do that, you can get a lot more done. And if you stay focused in the places you're supposed to be focused in, it allows you to just be more successful. As I think about it, I think about, what's the simplest way to get to a point, and how do you really get there quickly and understand it. And the simple mantra I say to the team is treat everybody as you would want to be treated. We're going to be okay.
Great. Now I'm expecting a simpler answer as well, Jonathan, to this last question, which is an interesting question. A lot of folks would want to get an answer from you on. What advice would you have for folks in the middle management aspiring to become CMO someday? Because you also had a very interesting career path, right? And it seems like there is no clear path. But if at all you have to have any guidance in terms of what learnings you've had over the last few years in terms of what it needs to be successful as CMO, what guidance would you have?
So I'll give you 3 things to make it easy. 1, enable your teams and enable them with accountability. So they're responsible, but they're enabled to go do what you hire them for. 2, you've got to prioritize. With that comes deprioritize. But it's you got to make some black and white decisions. And 3, and somebody taught me this a long time ago, and I think about it all the time. Don't run from something, run to something.
Anything that comes your way, just make sure that you are able to attack heads on and not sort of get scared away from it, right?
And ask for help, because you can't take it all on by yourself. You got great teams that you work with, great partners, people you work for. I ask my boss for help all the time. I ask my team for help all the time. I'm fortunate I get to work with some of the smartest people I've ever worked with in my life. And I don't hesitate to ask them for help so that you can do exactly what you just said, Kishore. Something comes your way, attack it head on.
Jonathan, it's been a pleasure. I think, like I said, you have a very interesting way to connect things in a very simple fashion. And I realized that when I asked you about what IBM does, and you had like a 2-line response, which just suddenly makes sense to me when I thought about IBM as a multiple BUs, multiple complex matrix structure. It just crystallized things a lot more. And sort of one thing I took away in your first point, you mentioned the ability to be vulnerable. when you don't know things, and sort of asking simple and stupid questions to make the field a lot more trustworthy together. It's an important takeaway I took away from this podcast. So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me, and look forward to joining you hopefully again in the future.